The wind was merciless that day, sweeping across the endless dunes like an ancient whisper that had forgotten how to rest, and in the midst of that lonely desert, trudging with cracked lips and trembling hands, was an old man everyone in nearby towns called the Faker. His real name was Eli Moore, but few remembered it anymore. For years, he had wandered from village to village, pretending to heal the sick with miracle water, claiming visions from God that never came. He was a man of lies, not out of malice, but survival, a washed-up preacher who had once believed in light but lost it somewhere between greed, guilt, and regret. The desert had become his punishment, vast, silent, and empty, a reflection of his own soul. But that day, as the sun blistered his back and his canteen ran dry, fate decided to test him one last time. Through the shimmer of heat, he saw something that made him stumble to his knees. A small figure collapsed in the sand. At first, he thought it was a mirage, another trick of the cruel horizon. But as he drew closer, he saw it was a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, her lips pale, her clothes torn, and her tiny hands curled as if clutching invisible hope. "God, not again," Eli muttered, his voice shaking, for he had seen death many times, but never one this innocent, this silent. He kneeled beside her, placed his trembling fingers beneath her nose, a faint breath. She was alive, barely. And suddenly, something long buried inside him, something he thought the years had stolen, flickered again. Eli looked around. Nothing but sand and the fading sun. His own water was nearly gone, a single swallow left in the dented flask hanging from his belt. He stared at it, feeling the old war of selfishness rise. "If I give her this, I die," he muttered. "If I drink it, she dies." For a long moment, the faker inside him, the man who lied, cheated, and ran, told him to walk away, to let the desert bury one more soul. But then he looked at her face. Dust streaked across her cheeks, lashes trembling against the light, a child fighting a battle she didn't deserve. Eli closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed the flask to her lips. "Drink, sweetheart," he whispered. "You need it more than I do." She stirred, barely conscious, but the small sound of her swallowing made him exhale a breath that felt like confession. He watched her chest rise and fall, and for the first time in years, he prayed, not for profit, not for forgiveness, but for the strength to save someone else, even if it cost him everything. When night fell, the desert turned cold and cruel. Eli built a fire from a few brittle shrubs and wrapped his tattered coat around the girl. He sat beside her, trembling not from cold but from the strange warmth of purpose seeping back into his soul. As she slept, she murmured one word, "Mama." It pierced him like a blade. He hadn't heard anyone call for their mother since his own boy had died decades ago, a son he had lost because he was too busy faking sermons and selling salvation. "You're not losing this one too," he whispered to himself. At dawn, he lifted the girl in his arms and began walking, every step heavier, his breath shorter. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but somewhere deep inside, Eli believed he wasn't alone anymore. Maybe God hadn't left him, maybe he'd just been waiting. Hours turned to days. Eli's feet blistered and bled, his lips cracked until they bled too, but he never put her down. He whispered stories to keep her spirit awake, stories of stars that led lost souls home, of angels that watched from the wind. The girl sometimes opened her eyes, barely whispering her name, Lena. He smiled every time. "Lena," he repeated softly, "you hang on, little dove." He shared with her every crumb of dry bread he had, every drop of dew he could scrape from morning stones. By the third day, Eli could feel his body failing, but something greater than survival pushed him forward, redemption. And then, when he thought his legs would finally give, he saw a thin column of smoke far ahead. A camp, civilization, salvation. He staggered into the camp of Bedouin travelers just before collapsing face first into the sand. The men rushed forward, shouting in Arabic, pulling Lena from his arms. When Eli woke again, he was in a tent, his body covered in blankets, his lips wet with water. A woman was kneeling beside him, dark eyes, kind face, the leader's wife. "The girl lives," she said. "You saved her." Eli turned his head weakly. Lena lay beside the fire, sleeping peacefully, color back in her cheeks. His heart clenched. "Thank you," he rasped. The woman smiled gently. "It is we who should thank you. Few men would do what you did." Eli turned away, tears burning his eyes. "Few men have so much to make up for," he whispered. In the days that followed, as his strength returned, he stayed by Lena's side. The travelers told him they would take her to a nearby village, where she could be reunited with her people or cared for by missionaries. But Lena refused to leave Eli's side. "He's my grandpa," she said stubbornly, clutching his hand. The camp laughed softly, but Eli's throat tightened. Grandpa. No one had called him family in decades. When the time came to part, the woman placed food and water in his satchel. "You are welcome to stay," she said kindly. Eli shook his head. "I've got more walking to do," he said quietly. He turned to Lena, knelt, and brushed her hair back from her face. "You keep that smile, little dove. It's stronger than the sun." She frowned. "You're coming with me." Eli smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart. My road's still out there. But you," he pointed toward the horizon where the village smoke rose, "you go where the people are. That's where miracles belong." She threw her arms around his neck, and for a moment, the old faker, the liar, the cheat, the broken man, felt whole. He left before dawn, walking into the desert once more, but this time, he carried something no one could fake: peace. Every mile behind him felt like a sin forgiven. He no longer sold hope, he had lived it. Months later, in a small village near the Nile, missionaries told of a little girl found in the desert with an old man who vanished after saving her. They called him the Desert Angel. But Eli never returned to claim the title. Some say he died among the dunes, others say travelers saw him years later, helping lost pilgrims find their way. But Lena remembered him always. When she grew up, she became a nurse, dedicating her life to saving others. On her clinic wall, she hung a weathered flask, the same one he had given her water from, engraved with simple words she carved herself: "He gave what he didn't have." Years later, an American journalist heard her story while covering humanitarian work in Egypt. He tracked down the history, followed her accounts, and eventually published the article titled, "An Old Faker Found a Young Girl in the Desert, True Story." It went viral, touching hearts around the world. Readers wept not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, because it reminded them that even the most broken souls can still be vessels of grace. The story became a beacon of hope, especially in hospitals and shelters where Lena's foundation provided water and medical aid to stranded travelers and children. She often told her volunteers, "I was saved by a liar who told the truest story with his actions." And when people asked if she believed Eli was sent by God, she would smile and say, "If he wasn't, then God must have borrowed him for a while." In the end, what began as a lie ended as truth. Not the kind spoken from pulpits or written in holy books, but the kind lived in moments of choice, when one life decides another is worth more than its own. Eli Moore, the faker, the wanderer, the man who once sold salvation, had finally found it, not in wealth, not in miracles, but in mercy. The desert had taken everything from him, yet gave him the one thing he needed most: a reason to be good again. And so the legend of the old faker became not a story of deceit, but of redemption, proof that sometimes, the greatest truths are born from the hearts of those who have lied the most, and that no matter how lost one becomes, there is always a child, a chance, or a choice waiting somewhere in the sand, to lead you home.